Welcome to Artsplanations, the podcast that is for non-artists, artists, and everyone in between.
We talk about art and try to explain what we think about it, and as artists, why we think that way. We ask questions to try and bridge the gap between viewer and creator to make the art world more accessible to everyone. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I am Joanna Bolsons, and with me as always is...
Andrew Malcheski.
Today's episode, we're going to be talking about appropriation in art. Kind of where is the line? When is it appropriation, and when is it just being a good thief? Because in art, we're taught steal like an artist. But we want to know, or we're trying to focus this episode on the appropriation aspect, when it's just blatantly obvious that you are unethical.
I don't agree with that.
You don't?
I don't think appropriation is unethical. I think appropriation is something that every artist has to do and should do.
See, and I don't. I think there is being inspired and trying to integrate maybe a culture or an idea to your work, but you do your own flair to it, whereas appropriation is when you just blatantly rip somebody off and you don't give them the credit that they're due.
See, I don't think that's the definition of appropriation. I think appropriation is...
Well, okay, sorry, go ahead.
I think the common term when people say appropriation and they're talking about the arts, what they're talking about is taking a concept idea or something that someone else has done and attributing it to them or as a homage to that person.
Okay, I'm really glad you said that. So you're taking it as more of a positive spin.
Yeah.
Doing research for this, I found a great quote from Tate, the Tate Modern. So their quote is, "Appropriation in art and art history refers to the practice of artists using pre-existing objects or images in their art with little transformation of the original." And to me that means, end quote, I guess, to make sure I don't appropriate the phrase. To me that means you are just taking an image, like take Shepard Fairey, for example.
Yeah. Took
an image, he barely manipulated it, just kind of flattened it out and added color, and then called it his own. But he didn't give credit to the photographer, didn't give credit to anybody but himself. He had good intentions,
right,
but it was absolutely appropriation.
See, that's theft to me. It's like plagiarizing something in a paper. You can take someone else's words and you can put them in your paper. And if you don't cite your source, it's theft. But if you cite your source, it's a citation. And I think
so. For you, appropriation isn't theft.
Right, it's citing your source. If I was to do
But that's the whole point. Appropriation isn't citing your source, so therefore it is theft.
No, it's theft. I would call it theft at that point, not appropriation. When I call something appropriation, it would be like if I used the composition of the school of Athens because I wanted to reference Raphael or something he's done as a way, but I did it in with a bunch of modern figures. Am I stealing his composition? No, I'm appropriating it. I'm using it in my own way, even though it's the same composition, and I would then attribute I am using Raphael's School of Athens. If I say I came up with this composition, I'm stealing it.
But I think that's the whole point, is those artists that are appropriating aren't giving the original artist credit. They aren't citing their source. Just like Shepard Fairey. So for those that don't know, Shepard Fairey... there's a great documentary on this whole scenario called Obey Giant. I think it's on Hulu. For his Hope poster for the Obama campaign, he took a photo.
It was an AP photo, right?
I think so. And this is how crappy of a researcher I am. I didn't write it down. But he took, and everybody knows this whole story. He took a photograph, didn't manipulate it at all, just blocked it out and added color.
Yeah.
He changed the color, that was it. He didn't change the direction, didn't flip the image, didn't do any kind of shading or anything. And he said, yeah, I made this. And then what's worse is when he was getting called out on it, he again said, no, this is my original image, didn't cite the photographer, and then even tried to go back and delete all of the files and any information left on his computer. That is the worst form of appropriation / theft. / unethical acting.
And that is absolutely unethical. And I would absolutely say, at that point, yes, that form of appropriation is wrong. But there's the other form of appropriation that I'm talking about where I think every artist has to do it. You have to study the masters. You have to study other people. You should try to copy their stuff.
I think when you're learning, yes. But when you're at that level, that to me is lazy. And it's appropriation just for money's sake.
Right. I mean, and it's this... Right, that is, at that level, it is unethical to appropriation just for money's sake. He should have paid that guy the rights to use it. Yeah. And then it wouldn't have been appropriation.
Exactly. And he should have said, when somebody said, oh, hey, that looks like this photo, he'd be like, yeah, I used his photo.
And he should have paid him royalties for it. What I'm talking about isn't the ability to pay someone the rights for their thing. If you use Raphael's School of Athens as your composition, there's nobody to pay that's free and fair to use.
So for those who don't know, explain Raphael's School of Athens.
So Raphael, the famous Renaissance painter, he painted on one of the walls in Rome this famous collage of notable figures of the era, including Michelangelo, Da Vinci as Homer, but they're all different ancient Greek philosophers, but they're all also modern luminaries of the time. Very famous composition, very famous work. If you saw it, you would know it. It's that kind of piece, like the Mona Lisa. If I were to do a Mona Lisa, right, like literally taking the exact composition that Da Vinci used, but I did it of you. That, I think that's okay to do, appropriating that style and that composition. I would still cite Da Vinci, and it's when you don't cite Da Vinci, you're like, yes, this is an homage to Da Vinci. This is an homage to them. I'm appropriating their ideas and their concepts for my own use, while also giving a nod to what they've done. And artists have done that forever. I mean, it crops up in classical artwork where you see a figure that is done in the style of Michelangelo in a different work. Or, another artist who is also using the poses that they saw from another artist or another era. And that's how ideas translated across the world before the internet.
But I think that's the whole point, though. They are citing. They are saying, yeah, I was inspired by this, the poses from this era, and I have changed it into my work. I think that is different.
Then what is that called?
That's called stealing like an artist. That is called...
That's such a bad term for it,
I know, but I can't think of another word. That is called being inspired and manipulating something so that it is now your style. It is now something new. It is not a direct copy. I think you're focusing on being inspired and turning a piece into something new, when this was about appropriation, about theft, just blatant theft.
I didn't think it was about blatant theft. I think that's a completely different...
Well, that's why I'm the depressed one in the relationship.
Because theft, so Duchamp is a good place to talk about theft, because if you look at Duchamp, he had the ready-mades.
Yeah.
He took an object. He put his name on a pedestal. He did it with a intent and purpose about the conceptualization and saying something about art. The work of art isn't the object that you see, it's the concept behind the object and what it represents. And it is relevant because of the era in which it was done and how it was presented. Everybody who does something like that after him is simply stealing his ideas, his work of art.
Oh, I think that's the whole point of conceptualism. Like, he's already come up with that concept, so now you gotta move on.
Right.
Yeah.
And for me, that is theft. Whereas appropriation, if I take his object, the fountain, that urinal, and I use it in one of my own pieces as a reference to that concept, am I stealing? Or is that
It depends on, I would have to see the work. If you're referencing it, if you're citing it as, yes, here's Duchamp's ready-made fountain.
Right.
And you've done something around it, I would have to see it as a whole to make a judgment on that. That's too broad of a scenario to actually make the call.
But for me, that's appropriation. That's when I talk about appropriation, that's what I'm referring to. If it was someone who wasn't citing it or not using it as an homage or not, referencing it, I would call it theft. I think it's the same way when, someone samples music for a rap track or something.
But they do give them credit. They are on the writing credits in the liner notes. They get a part of the royalties, or they should.
Should be, unless it's within fair use.
Yeah.
Right, which is like 3 seconds.
Which, that becomes a minutia, but the point is, they do give them credit. Look at Run DMC, and they used Aerosmith. You know, they brought Aerosmith pretty much back from the dead. I think they were about to, like, be done. But they sampled them, and they turned it into something new. That, to me, is not appropriation. That is influence.
Okay, then what about After Walker Evans by Sherry Levine?
That is an absolute appropriation and just a terrible, terrible piece of work, in my opinion.
But it's just like Duchamp, the work isn't the object that you see, but the concept behind the object.
Then write a paper on it.
That's not how we communicate as visual artists.
That, to me, it's insulting.
So, before we go further, After Walker Evans by Sherry Levine is a work of art that she did in... So, Walker Evans did the Great Depression Dust Bowl photography from the 30s. Sherry Levine, I believe was in the early 80s, did After Walker Evans, which she took a picture of his picture and then reproduced the picture that she took of his picture and called it After Walker Evans.
Now explain why.
Trying to expose and dissembling mass media fictions and talking about the complications of reproduction in the art world.
See, but just the fact that we're having to read about it in order to understand it, one, that's an issue with conceptual art that I have. Like, I want to be able to see it at face value. If all I'm seeing is a picture of a picture, that's lazy to me. And I understand and I can respect the thinking behind it, the concept behind it. I would much rather read an essay or a paper on it.
Right. I mean, the other thing she was doing was she was calling to the fact that Walker Evans profited off of the photos he took of these incredibly poor Americans.
And he wasn't the only one to do it either.
You know, he appropriated their imagery for his own personal gain without giving anything to them.
And there were several that was doing that. I think there was a female photographer that was doing it at the exact same time as Walker Evans. And again, I agree with Sherry Levine's point, but I would much rather read it. I would much rather see a documentary on it. And maybe her thinking was to put it at the same level as his, so that it's a level playing ground since she's calling him out. But I just don't like it.
See, I actually don't have a problem with this. Once again, I think part of it is the intent of the artist and the concept behind how she's using that.
Did she do that to anybody else, though, or just him?
I mean, she appropriated a lot of stuff, where a lot of her work was taking images that other people had did as a way to call out, the state of things, that the unfair state that those things showed. Much like how, who's the one who did all the film stills to show the gaze, the male gaze?
Cindy Sherman.
Much the same way Cindy Sherman, she would dress up in these masculine roles as a woman and call out this idea of the male gaze in a time where that was not something. Though.
She took her own photos.
Right, but
she
the
dressed
concept
up herself.
Right, but the concept of Levine isn't to put herself in it, but instead to call out what has been done by using what they did to make the statement.
I'm going to disagree on that. Okay. Because I feel like we're just going to talk in circles on that. But on that same vein of taking somebody else's photo, what about Andy Warhol? So, he was really controversial when he first came out because he was basically just taking giant soup cans and painting them. People didn't like that, but again, the concept behind it was to call America out on their commercialism and their consumerism and all that stuff. But my favorite series was actually the Death series, where he had all those car crashes and stuff. Specifically, the Suicide Fallen Body. So he used a photo by Robert Wiles that was in a Life magazine. So he cut that out, or maybe he got permission, I don't know. But then he blew it up and did his normal, screen prints, where it was in all these other pop colors.
Yeah.
It was a black and white image of the suicide, but did these really bright, vibrant colors. Now, for me, that's not appropriation. because it's public access. If it's already in a magazine,
But
collage artists can use that. And then he reprinted it with pop color to show how we consume death and we are unaffected by it.
And did he give attribute to the original photographer?
My understanding is yes.
Okay. So he attributed the original person, so that falls under my definition of appropriation. And he transformed the image, so that doesn't even fit in appropriation.
That's what I'm trying to say, though. Here's the flip side to it.
Yeah, that's not appropriation at all, because I think the real question is how much do you have to transform an image before it's no longer appropriation?
Funny you say that, because I think it's something like 30%. Or there's a certain percentage.
There's a legal threshold. But what does that even mean, though? Because Shepard Fairey is being called out for theft because he changed colors and made it a flat image. I would say that's more than 30%.
Really?
Yeah. He keylined it and he blocked it out into a set of 3 colors.
I think it was the fact that he was making money off of it.
Which, under the legal terms, you can use things as long as it's not for monetary value. You can use them for educational value. And you don't have to, attribute anything you're doing. That's not theft. It's not, stealing someone's copyright. Even that kind of appropriation should still give credit where credit is due.
And he didn't, though, is the
right.
issue.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel about collage artists? People that cut up magazines and books and stuff like that. To me, that's fine. Because they're changing the context of it. They're taking it out of the context it was originally in, and they're placing it in a new context.
It's all about intent for me. If you look at who did all the Monty Python collage bits?
I have no idea.
Oh, it was Terry Gilliam.
Terry Gilliam? He's one of the actors, right?
Yeah. I was pretty sure it was one of the guys.
He did not do the Beatles albums. No. But that's fine, because he's taking it out of its context and putting it in a new context. And they're manipulating it, not only by animation, but manipulating it.
Well, then, why wasn't Shepard Fairey's okay? He took it out of its original context.
I think because he just lied the whole time. I think he lied the whole time about, no, I didn't steal this guy's work. And then he went back and tried to delete all the evidence off his computer. I think it was more than just, oh, you didn't manipulate enough. Oh, you're now getting monetary gain from it. Now you're lying about it. I think it was a whole plethora of things. And he's just become a great example of what not to do.
Yeah. And that's the thing that we can both agree on is that is definitely an example of what not to do.
And there's honestly a level of subconscious plagiarism that you might accidentally do. I did a painting of a witch for Halloween that I was in love with, and I just watched a movie, the Love Witch movie, and I was like, oh yeah, like I'm going to do this, blah, blah, blah. Pretty sure I used the same color palette as a friend of mine who did a screen print of a witch, like a couple of years ago. And like, I didn't realize it until maybe a year after I did my painting. Oh crap, I think I subconsciously copied Michelle.
And that's something that happens all the time in the arts is you hear something, you see something, you're like, I like that. And so you put it on the back burner as a thing that you like, and then something comes up, and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this thing. You're like, this is original. I'm totally being real. And then you get done with it, and then you see that same thing, and you're like, oh, I now see where I was influenced.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think, again, citing your sources, admitting, oh man, I think I did copy this, and just being a decent human being about it.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, for me, a lot of it has to do with intent. The artist's intent in what they're doing.
Yeah. That's why you do your research before you make anything.
Yeah. And even then, things are still going to fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're talking about is appropriation, but not cultural appropriation, because that is a entirely separate can of worms to get into the history of and talk about.
And I feel, as two white people, we should definitely have that conversation with somebody
who has actual culture that wasn't stolen.
A person of color, so that we can have a very balanced conversation and not like, oh, well, I feel about this. Like, because at that point, our feelings don't really matter. It's everybody's.
Right.
So maybe episode part 2.
Yeah. In case you're wondering what cultural appropriation is, it is when one group of people utilize something from another group of people for their own personal gain without giving any kind of reimbursement or credit to the original group that it was taken from.
Or even just using it in a way that the culture itself would not use it, so that it changes the
intent and direction of what that culture is, the original culture is.
Yeah, and it changes the cultural subconscious. So it's ruining the collective subconscious of humankind. So they see, a great example is No Doubt's music video. I can't remember the name of the song, but they're dressed in Native American garb. So Gwen Stefani has a huge headdress, which not everybody in the tribe gets to wear a headdress, right? So people might see this who have no idea about Native American culture and think, oh, that's a thing. Just anybody, like any powerful woman can wear it. No, you have to earn that.
Right.
And then in the video, she's also seen throwing the eagle feathers in the ground. That is a huge no-no in Native American culture. If your feather falls to the ground during one of their dances, I don't want to think of a name because I might say the wrong name for their dance, but if an eagle feather falls to the ground during one of your dances, you have to stop. And I think it's a veteran has to come pick it up, and that feather is no longer yours. You have to give it to somebody. Like, so for her to just blatantly be throwing them on the ground, like, obviously shows she didn't do any research to it. She just thought this was an aesthetic that they wanted to use for a music video.
Right.
That is appropriation.
Yeah. I mean, the classic one that most people talk about is Orientalism, which is where the English went through India and they had all these paintings that came back to England showing all these bright, happy brown people who were just open for nonstop sex all the time.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, India's a place where you can go and have a bunch of sex and white people are kings.
Which, I mean, they're still pushing that narrative.
Yeah, and that's why it's the one that usually comes up, because it was so prevalent in 18th and 19th century paintings from India that went back to England.
But again,
we're not talking about that.
But it all ties in together. I mean,
does.
Van Gogh did paintings inspired by Japanese prints.
Right. But I mean, but his paintings inspired by them, and that's where it gets really dicey. He's like, I don't feel like he was trying to steal the Japanese culture. I think he was inspired by the design aesthetic and the look of that, and he wanted to incorporate it into his work out of, because he truly enjoyed what he saw.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the times he did it just looks bad.
Yeah, they weren't that great. But, like you said, I think he was just genuinely inspired. And it's not like he was all of a sudden put down his oils and then picked up a carving tool and a wood block. No, he was trying to do it in his own way.
His own way. And also trying to incorporate, once again, stealing artists, he was trying to incorporate color schemes he saw. He was trying to incorporate that flat design aesthetic, not the imagery or, the culture of those people. A little bit of the culture of those people.
Which for an untrained artist, because he was self-taught, right?
For the most part, yeah.
So for an untrained artist, I can just picture him being really excited because his letters to Theo and everything, he was just genuinely an excited person who got really excited about things that he...
Intense. Yeah.
But I think he just genuinely had an interest in it and he was excited about it, so he wanted to try it. And for somebody to be inspired by such a flat image when he obviously painted really, really thick, I think he was just trying to challenge himself because he really, really wanted to be an artist. So he was trying to push himself to be a master.
I think it also has to do with the fact that he was very much wanted to depict the everyday life of people. Mm-hmm. He wanted to depict the farmer and the potato eaters. There was something he was passionate about wanting to be a painter of. And, a lot of the influence you saw of Japanese prints came off of shipping boxes, basically the wrapping paper from Dutch shipments from Japan.
Yeah.
And they were depictions of
Everyday
people, rice workers out in rice fields and scenery of Japan. And so I think that also had an influence on them because it was similar imagery in a completely different style.
So to circle back.
Yeah, back to appropriation.
So, to circle back, doing research on appropriation in art, I kept coming up, like, if you click Google Images, it just pops up all that stuff. I kept seeing images of, like, the Mona Lisa that has been manipulated into Homer Simpson. Or, let's see, I think Homer was also in Monk's The Scream. Like, there was a lot of parody.
Yeah.
To me, that's not appropriation, that's parody. Or, like, speaking of Van Gogh, during the pandemic, there was all those memes where he had the mask, but it wouldn't stay on because he had cut off his ear.
Yeah.
To me, that's not appropriation, that's a parody. And when a painting or a piece of work is so famous
yeah.
and so ingrained into popular culture and just the universe that everybody knows, oh, that's Raphael's, or oh, that's Michelangelo's thinker. Like, I think whenever it's when it's so popular like that, you don't have to worry about appropriation. Then it becomes parody, or it becomes an homage.
I still think you have to worry about appropriation.
Really?
We were just at lunch the other day with a friend of yours, and she was like, I was at this concert, and the band was singing this really famous Queen song that they cover, and these young kids are also at the concert, like, I love this song of theirs. And someone's like, that's a cover of a Queen song. Like, no, it's not. And when you get that's one of the problems is when you start to inundate our population, especially with popular media, social media, and you can just suddenly put these images out. You have people who are coming to it for the first time, and they don't realize, oh, this is an homage to something. This is someone doing something that is referencing culture. And they only know the pop culture. How long until the culture gets left behind because it's no longer being referenced?
That's a good point. Also, music is so hard when it comes to deciphering between an homage or a cover, because it's all audible. It's not something you can visually see. So
I don't think there's a difference.
I'm not disagreeing on that. I'm just saying it's hard when it comes to music, because somebody might sing with a separate inflection versus the original artist, or they might do it as, I don't know, an acoustic version. So during Nirvana's Unplugged thing on MTV, they covered like Mudhoney or somebody's song, and for the longest time I didn't know that was a cover, but then I heard the original and I realized, oh, that was a cover or whatever. And I think that's what makes it hard, is you can change it even though it's somebody else's song.
Right. You can, once again, if you're changing it,
it's still a cover, though. You didn't write the lyrics. You didn't write the arrangement. You might have gone from an acoustic to
But maybe you did rewrite the arrangement to fit your band's new style. If someone plays a song that was played on acoustic and now they're playing it with an electric guitar and drums and bass, they have to write the arrangement for all those instruments. You look at Michael Jackson's Annie and Alien Ant Farm's Annie. Same song.
I love Alien Ant Farm's cover.
Right, it's a good cover of that song. And do you know how many people I've heard say that they love that Alien Ant Farm song and have no clue that's a Michael Jackson?
What?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not even a Michael fan, and I even know that's...
Right. You also grew up in the era of Michael Jackson, and you would recognize it as such. But people who didn't...
So are you changing your tune now? Are you saying...
Oh, no, I'm not changing my tune. I'm just saying that there is a difference when it comes to the different mediums and how you have to look at appropriation. If you look at dance, is it appropriation if a choreographer uses the costume from another person's dance ensemble as a way to show homage to it? Is it appropriation if they use the same sequencing of moves? So
I know of a lawsuit where that's happened, where they well, I guess depending on whose side you're on, the plaintiff basically won because, you know, traditionally for like Swan Lake, you do a pas de deux, which is where the feet, where they jump and they twiddle their feet, you know, and then they do the back and forth in a row.
Great description for an audio medium, especially with something that I don't know like what that is.
So that's a traditional move during Swan Lake, and you're just expected, if you are putting on Swan Lake, you do a pas de deux.
Okay.
But if you were doing any other part, like say you were doing the Firebird or you were doing the Nutcracker, the storyline's the same, but the movements are different. And so I can't remember what ballet it was.
Swan Lake and the Nutcracker are the same story?
No.
Oh.
No, I'm giving those as examples.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, I can't remember what ballet it was, but two choreographers, one was getting sued because the plaintiff said that she copied her choreography. Mm-hmm. And it was, I think, 5 or 6 sequences of moves. So you go from, you know, just to break it down, say you go from first position to a ball change to a leap to a twirl, and then you go on to something else. Like, that's a sequence of moves, right?
Yeah.
So choreographer 1 did that. Choreographer 2 took that and entered it into her ballet. She changed the music, changed the story, but the sequence of events, there were so many moves that were exactly the same in the same sequence. She was told that she won, basically.
Right. She plagiarized the other person.
Yeah, exactly. So there is some appropriation in ballet. Some is homage when it comes to like Swan Lake and the pas de deux. And there's, I think, maybe even the Firebird. There's a couple of moves which, when you put on the Firebird, that's expected. But other than that, you're supposed to come up with your own stuff.
Yeah, and that's why when we talk about appropriation, I think it's interesting that you follow this, you know, more traditional kind of appropriation is theft. And I don't see it as theft, I see it more as that homage category of stuff.
I also think we're talking about two different things.
And yeah, that could totally be
it's just par for the course with us.
Yeah. Which is why I think it's interesting to have this conversation about what is appropriation when we're talking about it, and making sure that if someone's like, yeah, oh, he's just appropriating it, you're both on the same wavelength about what that means.
Which I do want to say, before we end the episode, doing research for this, I did come across an artist, Raquel Van Haver. Hopefully I pronounced that right. She is a collage artist, and I couldn't tell that they were collages at first. Like, she has manipulated the imagery that she has collected so much that it's become a new piece. She had some work at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. Wonderful pieces of work. And so I think when you appropriate stuff, you can do it in the right way. And so I wanted to give props to her.
Yeah, and I think that's, for me, that's why I said it's the intent of the artist.
Yeah. Because she's changed the context enough that it's something new. And I was pretty frustrated during this, like researching Shepard Fairey and just getting into the minutia of like lawsuits and stuff like that. So I was really happy to find somebody that isn't quite appropriating, but she's just changing the context of something in her work. So I just wanted to give props to her, and I love finding a new artist. I wanted to say that.
Yeah. You know, whenever I think about these kind of things, appropriation or stealing like an artist, or having an homage or whatever you want to call it, when you're taking something that someone else has done, the limit for me is always, you know, I always think about it as a conversation. If this work is a conversation, whether it's visual art or music or dance, if it's a conversation that work is having with you, the viewer, and they're repeating the same conversation that someone before them has had, then it's theft. But if they are adding to the conversation, if they're building on it, if they're developing it, and just using that as a base for that development, then it's appropriation. That's how I've always looked at it.
I like how you phrase that, and for a couple that tends to talk in circles most of the time, I really appreciate how that's broken down.
Thanks. I've been thinking about that for about 10 years and was finally able to winnow it down into a easy, succinct
Yay, you.
Well, I've only done it with 2 things. That's one. The other one was what is art. So give me another 10 or 15 years, and I'll have at least a 3rd or 4th.
Do you have a piece when you were doing research for this episode? Did you have a piece that spoke to you, or one that just kind of jumped out? Maybe not that you enjoyed, but one that just kind of stuck on your brain.
The Sherry Levine one. Just because when I first saw it, without actually reading into it, I was like, "Oh yeah, no, that's theft. You shouldn't do that." Like, it's like putting a white painting in a gallery and calling it.
Well, it just reminded me of Richard Prince, how he took all those people's pictures off of Instagram and then just blew them up.
Intent, though.
His intent was just to... Wasn't he calling out, like, everyday media or something like that? He had intent behind it, but it was the same thing. Like, I would much rather read a paper that you wrote on this.
I don't know enough about that Richard Prince piece because I don't like him personally.
Yeah, I don't like him either.
And so I don't spend... I see his name and I kind of just, like, I don't care about what garbage you're putting out. But the Sherry Levine piece, doing the research on it and reading into it, and it made me appreciate the work and be like, no, actually... If it wasn't done at the same level, it wouldn't have made sense. If you just wrote a paper about it, it doesn't have the impact.
I think it does.
I don't. Who's going to read that paper? Art
Me?
historians. You, an artist. But by putting it in a gallery, by doing it that way, it gets talked about in the media, and people who aren't artists become interested, and suddenly it has a potent impact. It forces people to think about what they're actually seeing. And I think in that sense...
I'll agree to that, but how many people will actually think about it and read that blurb? How many people will just look at it and walk away?
More than would read the article if it was written as an article. And that's what I'm saying. As a conversation, she has taken what has been done before, and it is a stepping stone to present her own ideas and continue her own conversation forward. And I don't think it can be done as a written essay.
I think it can be done, but I do think, though, presenting in the gallery is probably a quicker, easier way to do it.
I think it's more impactful, and I think it drives more to the point of the critique. Yes, it could be written as an essay, but then it's an essay that is being used to make a statement about a way that you could critique something, as opposed to just doing it and being like, here it is. Take it in, and you can see the critique in action as it works on you. And in that sense, that really stuck for me because, yeah, I've seen that work before in art history books, and usually with most contemporary work that I saw before I was 28, I was kind of like, who cares?
I want to look at the masters.
Yeah, I want to look at them. I really like the traditional works of the masters. I like Renaissance art. But since kind of going to school and actually reading about them, gaining an understanding and an appreciation, actually getting that appreciation has really deepened my appreciation for that kind of work. And it's one of the things that I don't like about contemporary artwork is that you have to do the reading to appreciate it. It's like, why? I just want to see nice things sometimes and not have to...
No, I'll agree to that. Sometimes I just want to look at something nice.
Yeah. But I think it's potent and relevant, and I think it's a good work of art as far as something that helps our culture and pushes us forward to think about what we see in the way we depict things, especially in our contemporary age where it's so easy to reproduce. The other thing is a lot of artists in the 60s and 70s who were doing this kind of appropriation work, they were responding to Walter Benjamin's Art and Age of Mechanical Reproduction and the photograph. And so it's because of how easy it became to reproduce things. And we had the photograph, and then we had Xerox printers, and then laser printers, and then computers that could just copy-paste things. And this idea of, well, what is an original? What is an original work of art then? How should we respond to these things if you can just Control-C, Control-V something?
Well, I mean, you can ask that question of all the masters, too, of all the painters. We've talked about how studio hands would do 90% of the painting, and then Michelangelo might go in and tweak something. Like, you can ask that question over the decades. I think it's the not the urgency, but the amount of work that you can put out in such a quick amount of time that's unoriginal. I think that's the question with that in the 60s and 70s. It was just becoming so easy to do it in mass quantities.
Yeah, I mean, Raphael died when he was 33, and the reason why he produced so much work is because he had over 50 assistants in his studio.
Yeah.
And that's how it was done.
Well, I'm not saying anything's wrong with it. I'm just saying, like,
right.
It's the same question throughout the ages, but now you could just do it so much quicker.
Right, you don't need 50 assistants. You can just go on your computer and click a couple buttons.
Yeah, or if you're a sculptor, you can just get a 3D printer and have it print for you.
I mean, Charles Ray, his large steel pieces, those are designed in a computer and then CNC routed out of a single block of steel. And it's a computer that does all the carving, and he goes in, and the last, 2 millimeters, he actually polishes and smooths the whole thing.
But it's his design, right?
He did it on a computer first, or he scanned a person.
That's just working smart to me. You know what I mean?
But what's the difference between doing that and hiring 50 assistants to do it?
Well, I wasn't arguing that. I'm just saying that whole argument that they were making in the 60s
right.
and 70s was the amount you could then produce with just a click of a button.
Right. And then, her photograph of a photograph has the fidelity of a picture taken of a picture. It's slightly blurry. There's small things you can see, like, oh yes, this is a picture of a picture.
You're slowly selling me on her, but I'm really just happy to be angry about it. So.
Mm-hmm. And that's how I was until I started looking into these things and understanding the concept and the...
I understand the concept.
Right. I know you do.
I'm just saying, I was really happy with being on the opposite side. I really like when we argue, so I'm okay with you selling me on it. I'm just not happy about it.
So what you're saying is I win? I win!
Get me.
Yeah, so that is our conversation on appropriation.
Yeah, we didn't really answer anything. We gave a few examples.
And I don't think it's something that we can answer without getting into the legal mumbo-jumbo of copyright.
You have to tweak it,
and
yeah.
what that means for an American versus a Chinese person or an English person or a Swede, because it's different legally depending on what country you're in.
I would really like to have a conversation, though, with people of color.
Yeah.
To talk about the cultural appropriation in art, though.
Yeah.
Because that is super prevalent even to this day.
Yeah.
And so to be able to address that in such a global world now with the age of the internet.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that's been going on since people have been making images. Well, I don't know if it's been going on that long, but since other people have been making images about other people's stuff.
No, it really has. I mean, archaeologists, they look at cave drawings and carvings, and they see carvings of animals that weren't in the area that they were in, but across the globe, so they knew that they were traveling. So it's absolutely been happening since the dawn of time.
Well, I was just thinking of Yinka Shunabare's work about the batik fabrics, which are seen as African fabrics now, but were actually the Dutch designing African fabrics to sell in Africa.
Oh, wow.
They made them in a style of African fabrics. But now they're like what you think of when you think of, like, traditional African headdresses that you would see women in like African Americans in the 90s wearing on like Montel or whatever. But those pattern designs were made by Dutch. And he's doing this whole thing where he's then taking that idea and reappropriating it and using them for European style clothing.
Well, I mean, who's to say that those people in, I guess back then it would be Holland, now it's the Netherlands, but maybe back then it was Holland, who's to say that they weren't people of color too? Because
they weren't.
Are we sure? Because there were archaeologists that just did DNA testing on 2 individuals that were in the Pompeii eruption. They did DNA testing and they found that they had like Mesopotamian roots and roots in Italy that they didn't know would be in that area at the time. So obviously people traveled way more than we like to give them credit for.
No, I'm pretty sure. I have a Shonabari book where he talks about it, and I'm pretty sure all those Dutch folk were white.
Oh.
And almost, I don't want to say definitively because I haven't looked at that book in about 7 years, but I'm almost positive the reason why he's doing it is because they were all white people appropriating the styles of another group of people
that they found exotic and exciting
to make and then send back to them their own style made not of any tribe with any significance for the sole purpose of monetary gain.
Oh, that's rough. I can see where, like, maybe you brought the influence back to sell to your own people because, you know, this culture is new and exciting and exotic, but to then sell it back to the people that you ripped it off from, that's a little messed up.
Yeah, and that's why
that's a lot messed up.
It's a lot messed up, and that's why when you look at his work and you read about it and you start to understand what's going on with it, it's like, you know, it's a double-edged attack in its layers.
I mean, my family is Dutch, and I could say a lot of stuff about the Dutch.
Texan and Dutch, ooh.
I know. I could say a lot of stuff about the Dutch that's not pretty.
I mean, you can say that about any European.
Very true, yeah. So
culture. You can say that about any American culture, too. Like,
I know.
It's not just restricted to Europe, it's American. You say that about pretty much every culture.
It's not shocking to hear. It just hurts when it's your own culture. But it's important to talk about.
Yeah. So
that we can evolve and move on and do better.
Yeah.
And be more kind.
Yeah.
It is appropriated from Frank Turner.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, if you are going to appropriate something, cite your source. Or transform it in a way which makes it truly yours. Or come up with an original idea, maybe. It's really incredibly hard to do, but if you keep at it, you can be done.
Well, that's our cue to go. So, thank y'all for listening. I am Joanna Bolsons.
I am Andrew Malcheski. Hopefully, you're still you. Thank you for listening to our podcast. It means so much that you would take the time to listen to us. If you like what you hear and would like to help us out, please like, comment, and subscribe. We want to have a conversation, and sometimes that means that as we talk about things, we might make mistakes, like in the pronunciation of names or the misattribution of statements or a piece of work, and messing up titles and dates. If we do, and we notice, we'll put a correction in the show notes, and if we don't, please let us know so we can.
We invite you to join the conversation, so please get in contact. Email us your favorite artwork, ask us to explore specific artists, or ask how something is made. You can find us at www.artsplanations.com. There you can also find out more about us, the show, and each episode. You'll be able to find out every artist, quote, and most of the specific vocabulary we use in each episode, as well as a list of upcoming topics. If you are curious about our artwork, the best place to find us is on our Instagram and other social medias, which are linked through the Artsplanation website.
We would also like to thank the Joy Drops and Free Music Archive for our music.